Welcome. This is DA Sports. I'm your host, DASASIN. Thank you. This is episode number 36. Now, today's episode is a special one. We're getting ready for the NFL playoffs. So we got a few different things to get into in regards to the NFL playoffs. For starters, we're going to talk about my preseason predictions of who I thought was going to make it to the playoffs versus who actually did make it. And within that, I'm going to talk about what I got most right and most wrong in each conference as far as my predictions. Then after that, we are going to get into my conference championship predictions. So I'm going to talk about specifically what I predicted preseason as far as who's going to play in the conference championship and who is going to go to the Super Bowl. And then based on the playoff format now, I'm also going to predict my conference championships and who I think is going to go to the Super Bowl. And then we're going to finish by getting into my picks for every single wild card game this weekend. So we have 2 games on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, 1 on Monday. It's going to be exciting. Let's get into it. So for starters, we're going to talk about my preseason playoff predictions in each conference and how they go against what actually happened. So for starters, I'm going to start in the NFC. Now, in the NFC, I predicted this is the order with seeding the teams I predicted. The NFC, I got to be honest, I didn't do too good. I only got 3 out of the 7 correct. So my predictions preseason in order were Detroit, San Francisco, Dallas, New Orleans, Green Bay, the Rams, and Chicago. Now, obviously, the actual seedings that happen in the NFC are Detroit, Philadelphia, Tampa Bay, the Rams, Minnesota, Washington, and Green Bay. So I got 3 out of the 7 correct. Obviously, I got Detroit was 1 of the 3. Green Bay was 1 of the 3, and the Rams are 1 of the 3. So less than 50% is not good. Obviously, there's some circumstances that led to, me getting those things right and wrong. The most thing I got most right was obviously Detroit. I predicted Detroit would enter the playoffs as the number 1 seed in the NFC, and I was absolutely right. They entered the playoffs as the number 1 seed and the best record in the NFC. The thing I got most wrong was Philadelphia. Philadelphia ended up being the 2 seed in the NFC, and I didn't even predict them to make it to the playoffs. If I recall from my predictions, I had them close, like having a decent record, but I had them missing the playoffs. I didn't have them winning their division. I had Dallas winning their division, which was clearly dumb. And so I was most wrong about that one. And there's actually a theme to that in regards to the teams that end up being the 2 seed and me predicting them not making the playoffs. So I was most wrong about that one. I mean, some of the things I was wrong about, I feel like it makes sense. With the Saints, I said that the NFC South was going to be a bad division. And I knew I had the Saints, the Falcons, and the Bucks all kind of close in the same range as far as record-wise. But the Saints obviously lost Derek Carr. So I think that definitely hindered their ability to make it to the playoffs. They also ended up changing coaches and everything else, so it kind of spiraled from there. But that was part of the reason why that one didn't go. Now, Chicago as a 7 seed, that was terribly wrong. I did predict that division was going to get in 3 different teams, and I knew that division was going to be the toughest division in the NFC. But I actually thought that Chicago was going to finish ahead of Minnesota and get into the playoffs, and clearly that was wrong. So that was how I did in terms of the NFC predictions. Let's move over to the AFC. Now in the AFC, my predictions in order for what I picked during the preseason, I had Houston, Kansas City, Baltimore, the Jets, the Bengals, the Browns, and the Steelers. Now, here is what actually is the seeding in order of the AFC playoffs. It's Kansas City, Buffalo, Baltimore, Houston, the Chargers, the Steelers, and the Broncos. So in the AFC, I got 4 out of the 7 correct. So overall, a 7 out of 14, so 50%. Not that great. I've done better in most years. This one was, like I said, pretty difficult. The thing I got most right in the AFC was Baltimore. I predicted that they would win their division, and I predicted that they would be the 3 seed. I was right on both accounts. Even though I think most people did predict Baltimore would make it into the playoffs, I think most people that had predicted Baltimore would win their division didn't expect them to be the 3 seed. I did, so I was right about that. And then the thing I was most wrong about was the same thing like in the NFC. It was in regard to the 2-seeded team. In this case, is the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo made it in as the 2 seed, second best record in the conference, and I didn't even have them making the playoffs. Now, justifiably, I expected them to take a step back based on all the players they lost. Not only did they lose both of their top 2 receivers from the previous season, they also lost a lot of their secondary from last year. So I felt like with that turnover and Josh Allen having to get adjusted to these turnovers in players, that they weren't going to be able to overcome it and they were just going to barely miss the playoffs. Now, he played excellent, part of the reason why I have him as my MVP candidate. He played excellent, so they were able to get into that 2 seed, so that was why I was most wrong. Now, in regards to some of the other things that I predicted, I did predict that the Jets would make it to the playoffs and win their division. They fell apart. I don't think anybody really expected them to be as bad as they were. Maybe some people didn't pick them to win the division, but I don't think anybody really expected them to finish with like 5 or 6 wins on the year and for Aaron Rodgers to look as bad as he did throughout the season. So I was wrong about that. I was right about Houston winning their division and making it to the playoffs. I was wrong about their overall seeding, but I think a lot of that had to do with their injuries. They had so many injuries to their receiving core. I think that was a big part of why they didn't end up with as good of a record as I originally predicted. Part of the reason why I predicted them to be the number 1 seed entering the playoffs is because I knew they play in the weakest division in the entire league, so I expected them to be able to benefit from that, which would give them a better record than Kansas City, but they weren't able to do that. But I was still right about them making the playoffs and winning their division. The other thing was in regards to the AFC North division, I had every single team making the playoffs. That I was wrong about. Only 2 teams made it to the playoffs, Pittsburgh and Baltimore. Cleveland and Cincinnati just did not make it. Cincinnati was close, but they, again, played like crap in the beginning of the season, and so that's why they missed. So that is it for my playoff predictions from preseason versus what they are now. Now, to dig in a little further, we're going to talk about my conference finals predictions from the preseason versus my conference finals predictions now. So, starting with the NFC, in terms of my conference predictions, before the season, I picked the Detroit Lions to beat the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game to advance to the Super Bowl. Now, obviously, that can't happen because San Francisco didn't even make it to the playoffs. Detroit is still in the playoffs and the number 1 seed, so they have a great shot of at least making it to the Super Bowl and proving me correct on my preseason prediction. But I'm actually going to veer off just a little bit. So now my conference final prediction is I'm actually going to predict that the Philadelphia Eagles beat the Detroit Lions in the NFC Championship game to advance to the Super Bowl. I think that both of those teams are great. I would not be surprised if my preseason prediction is correct that Detroit makes it, but I just feel like with all of the injuries they have on the defense, it eventually is going to catch up to them when they play one of these top-tier teams. Now, granted, based on how they looked against Minnesota in Week 18, it would make me think that maybe they're okay with all the players they're missing. But I just feel like that can't be the case against every single team, especially as they go up against more, I don't want to say more skilled quarterbacks, but more quarterbacks with more playoff experience, let's put it that way. And I think that's a big difference when it comes to like Jalen Hurts versus Sam Darnold. So I am predicting the upset in terms of Philadelphia making it to the conference finals and then beating Detroit in the conference final to make it to the Super Bowl. Now, in regards to the AFC. Now, the AFC, my preseason prediction for conference finals was for Kansas City to beat the Houston Texans in the AFC Championship game to advance to the Super Bowl. Now, that technically could still happen. Both teams are still in the playoffs. Both teams have a path to where that could happen, where they could meet in the AFC Championship game. Only thing that would require is that Baltimore or Buffalo would have to lose in their first round game, so that way whatever team beat them would have to play Kansas City first. Houston would then play the other opponent between Baltimore and Buffalo, the one that won. And then if Houston won and Kansas City won, they would meet in the conference final. So there is a path where it's possible they could meet in the AFC Championship game. But, however, I am not going with that prediction as of right now. I just feel like Houston has too many injuries. So, right now, I am picking Kansas City to beat Baltimore in the AFC Championship game to advance to the Super Bowl. Now, in regards to the preseason, I picked Kansas City to beat Detroit in the Super Bowl. Now I'm changing that. I'm going to pick Kansas City to beat Philadelphia in the Super Bowl. And those are my conference finals and Super Bowl predictions as of right now. Now, to finish off this week's episode, I'm going to get into every single wild card game this weekend. Now, we have 6 games this weekend, 2 on Saturday, 3 on Sunday, 1 on Monday. I'm going to go through every single game in order of when they'll be occurring. And so let's get straight to it. The first game that starts Saturday is the Los Angeles Chargers against the Houston Texans. Now, if you recall, my preseason pick was for Houston to make it all the way to the AFC Championship game. As it pertains to this game, though, I'm actually going to pick the Chargers to go on the road and beat the Houston Texans. Now, the Chargers right now are favored to win by 3 points. Being a favorite on the road in a playoff game is telling. I do think that this game will be close. I think, honestly, Houston's injuries are just going to be too much for them to overcome. I feel like the Chargers' way of playing just is going to be a bad matchup for Houston. I feel like Houston is going to struggle late in this game, and the Chargers are going to be able to grind out a win because they're a very physical team. Their offensive line and their running game is just very, in your face. I'm going to pound the ball over and over and over again. And I feel like Justin Herbert has heard enough talk about him not being at the level that most people keep trying to put him into. A lot of people argue that Justin Herbert is a top 5 quarterback. I don't see that. I do see him as a top 10 quarterback, but in order for him to really get himself in that top 5, he's got to be more productive in the playoffs. This will be the first way for him to start doing that. So I am going to pick the Chargers to get the win. And would I be surprised if Houston won? No. Would I be happy if Houston won? Yes. Because honestly, as a Chiefs fan, I would rather probably play Houston than the Chargers, mainly because we play the Chargers so many times. They're more familiar with our scheme and our players and stuff like that. So I just feel more confident that we'd be able to dominate Houston more than the Chargers. But nonetheless, just honestly predicting the game, I think the Chargers will pull off the win. Now, in the next game on Saturday, it is the Baltimore Ravens versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Baltimore is currently a 9.5-point favorite. Now, being a 9.5-point favorite in a playoff game is pretty ridiculous, especially when it's in regards to two teams who are division rivals, two teams who played each other twice this year, and they split the games 1-1. This line actually even opened up as a 10-point lead, which is kind of crazy. So I'm actually predicting that Baltimore is going to win this game. You could probably figure that out based on the fact that I picked Baltimore to make it to the conference finals. So I am predicting Baltimore will beat Pittsburgh, but I do not predict that they'll cover the 9.5 spread. I think that even their last game where Baltimore won by 17, the game itself was a lot closer than that. It turned with a late turnover, and so the final score wasn't really indicative of what the actual game was like. I feel like both these teams know each other very well. I feel like Lamar has struggled quite a bit against Pittsburgh in his history. So this is a prime example, and he struggled in the playoffs. So this is one of those games that I think is going to be really, really close. I don't predict that it'll be a high scoring game. It'll be just a hard fought battle down to the end. I do think Baltimore will get the win. Maybe even like a last second field goal from Justin Tucker. But it'll definitely, in my opinion, be less than a 9.5 point spread. But I do think Baltimore will be able to pull it off at home. Now, the next game that I'm going to pick is the first game on Sunday. That is the Buffalo Bills against the Denver Broncos. Now, this one is another large spread. This is the second largest spread of the week. Buffalo is favored to win by 8.5. And I do think that Buffalo will get the win. However, I do not think they're going to cover the spread. As crazy as it sounds, considering that Denver is in the playoffs for the first time in a long time. Denver has a rookie quarterback. You would think that this game is going to be a blowout, especially considering how well Josh Allen has played. But I think that Denver has a lot of confidence going into this game. I think they have the style of defense that has the speed to keep Josh Allen contained more than normal. I think Josh Allen is going to be productive regardless. He has proven to be productive in playoff games. But I think that Denver has a puncher's chance of winning this game. Now, I'm not predicting him to win this game, but I wouldn't be surprised if Denver pulled off the upset. I am saying that Denver will keep it closer than the 8.5 point spread. But at the end of the day, I think that Buffalo is going to get it done, mainly because I just feel like Josh Allen is going to will the team to a win. I think he's just scratching and clawing for an opportunity to get a rematch against Patrick Mahomes, to say this is the year where he makes things different. So, as far as this wild card matchup, I am picking Buffalo to win. Now, the next game in Sunday's games is Philadelphia against Green Bay. Now, this game is a 4.5 point spread in favor of Philadelphia. I am picking Philadelphia to win. This is another game, though, that I could see going either way, and I would not be surprised. Now, I'm predicting that Philadelphia will cover the spread, but not saying that I think it won't be a close game. I just think that it won't fall with less than 4.5 points. I think they'll end up winning by like 6 or 7, but it'll be a close game back and forth. My biggest concern for Philadelphia is Jalen Hurts' health. He hasn't played the last 2 or 3 weeks, something like that, and usually concussion protocol, if it's like I'm going to say minor concussion, because concussion is technically not minor regardless, but typically speaking, most people clear concussion protocol in a week. It took 3 weeks for Hurts to clear concussion protocol, and I heard he wasn't even like practicing during that time. He wasn't throwing balls or anything. So if he was really that adversely affected from his concussion, then maybe that plays a role into this game. Maybe they get out to a slow start. And we saw how Green Bay did last season in the playoffs when they get out to a fast start. They did that to the Cowboys in last season's playoffs, and they just boat raced them out the gate. So if that happens and Philadelphia comes out slow and the Packers start out fast, the Packers could go into Philadelphia and get the win. Now, I'm not predicting that to happen. I think Philadelphia will get the win. I think when Hurts is healthy, Philadelphia is probably the most balanced team in the NFC. And I think that's going to show itself in the game, especially as the game gets late, especially as Jordan Love starts to force passes. That's another thing. He's not 100% because he took an injury in their last game of the season. So it'll be close. I think it'll be an exciting game, but I am predicting that Philadelphia will pull off the win at home. Now, the last game on Sunday is the Washington Commanders at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Tampa Bay is favored to win by 3. This is the first game where I'm going with the upset. I am predicting that Washington will get the upset win over Tampa Bay. Now, Tampa Bay and Washington did play earlier in the season, and Tampa Bay won the game easily. You could argue that Tampa Bay has been playing better recently, but I actually think that they haven't. And I think Washington has been playing better recently. And I think Washington is in that kind of mode the same way Houston was last year, where they have a rookie quarterback who's clearly going to be Offensive Rookie of the Year. They are exceeding expectations in their first year with him as a starter. and they don't know what they don't know. And I feel like with Jaden Daniels' first time in the playoffs, where he should be nervous and stuff like that, I think he's just going to play free because there aren't really any expectations on them to succeed. And I think they're going to be able to pull off the win. I think Jaden Daniels' mobility is going to be a huge factor. He was a huge factor in the run game when they played during the regular season. They just weren't as productive in the passing game. I feel like this is going to be a little different. I can see this game coming down to the wire, and I'm predicting Washington will get the win. Would I be surprised if Tampa Bay wins this game? Would I be surprised if Tampa Bay ends up winning this game by double digits? No, I wouldn't, because we are still talking about a rookie quarterback. But in terms of my predictions, I am going to go with Washington to win this upset. Now, the last game of the wild card week is on Monday. It's against the Los Angeles Rams, against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, the Rams are at home, but they are favored to lose by 1 point. Minnesota is the favorite in this game, which based on the season makes sense. Minnesota, for majority of the year, looked like one of the most balanced teams. But I'm actually going with the upset in this game also. I'm picking the Rams to win for a couple of reasons. The way Minnesota looked in Week 18 against Detroit worried me because Detroit basically blitzed Sam Darnold throughout the game. They sent a higher percentage of pressure against Darnold than he had seen all year, and he just seemed like off his spot. He couldn't dial in his throws. He missed a lot of throws high, and I feel like that's going to carry over into this week. I feel like the Rams have the personnel to send the same amount of pressure, and they're going to force him to make quick decisions. And based on how he played last week, I feel like he could be a little rattled. And I think that the Rams have the personnel to execute the same type of script that Detroit did. The other part the reason why I think the Rams will get the win is because the Rams beat them during the season. When, ironically, and it's weird that it's playing out the same way, Minnesota was undefeated. And then they played Detroit in their first matchup of the season, and they got their first loss. The very next week, they played the Rams in LA, and they lost. And they lost 2 in a row. And that was their only 2 losses during the season until Week 18 when they played Detroit again. Now they're playing the Rams again. So it seems like everything is lining up the same way, and I think the outcome is going to be the same way, even though Minnesota's favored to win. I think that the Rams will pull off the upset and get the win and advance to the next round. So that wraps it up for this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace.